What's up, guys? Today I'm going to be giving you my top 10 scorers of all time, but before I can get into that, I need to give you guys some criteria. I have 5 main bullet points I need to go over. The first one being statistical greatness, and this involves points per game, total stats, efficiency, and just any metric that shows how good a scorer a player was. At number 2, I have sustained level of play. This includes things like longevity, how long were you a great scorer, and for me, you have to be in a great scorer for a minimum of 5 years. At number 3, of overall skill and ability. This includes the offensive arsenal of a player, the eye test, and basically the understanding of eras, spacing, and things like that. The more intricate things that stats really don't show. At number 4, we have playoff performances. And this is just evaluating do players rise to the occasion in the playoffs. Do their numbers get better? Do they remain the same? Or do they get worse? That's what playoff performance is all about. At number 5, one of the most important things we have, late game clutch scoring and playing well on the biggest stage. Are they a great scorer in the big moments? Are they willing to take the big shots? And are they clutch in general? That is a huge factor in determining who some of the best scorers of all time are. So with those 5 bullet points laid out, I'm going to get into my top 10 right now. At number 10, we do have the answer, Allen Iverson. And Iverson was a 4-time scoring champion, all with the 76ers. That's the 3rd most all-time, only behind Kevin Durant, Michael Jordan, and Wilt Chamberlain. He has a career average of 26.6 points per game. That is good enough for 7th all-time. He has 11 seasons of over 25 points per game and 4 seasons of over 30 points per game, doing this in the hardest era defensively, which is from about 2000 2004. And Iverson had a 6-foot frame, only 165 pounds. He was unbelievably dominant for his position and what he was able to do on a basketball court. Now, some of the criticisms Iverson receives, Eddie's a selfish, or he's a ball hog, or that he's even inefficient. I will admit the inefficiency, that is a huge glaring mark. He has only 2 seasons over 45% shooting, and he has 2 seasons below 40% shooting, but I think that's largely due to his era and the circumstances surrounding his team. He was playing with a lot of subpar offensive players, and I mean, at the end of the day, who would you rather have shooting the shot? Allen Iverson or Eric Snow? I think everyone would answer Allen Iverson, and I think his inefficiency can be explained to an extent, but it still is a glaring mark. And just to end on a positive note, Iverson has a career average of 29.7 points per game in the playoffs. That is second only to Michael Jordan, and he did score 24,368 points, good enough for 30th all time. At number 9, I do have Shaquille O'Neal, and over Shaq's 19-year career, he played with 6 different teams, and he was able to compile 28,596 points, good enough for 10th all time. And we're looking at Shaq's absolute peak or his prime from 1993 to 2006. He was able to average 26.3 points per game, shooting 58% from the floor. You'll be hard-pressed to find another big man in NBA history who has a 14-year stretch where he's able to average 26 points per game on 58% shooting. And speaking about shooting, Shaq was able to lead the NBA in field goal percentage 10 different times, and he led the NBA in scoring 2 different times. And some people might say, oh, he has no moves, he's a big man, and I understand that point of view, and it is kind of hard to evaluate big man, as I said in the intro, but I mean, Shaq did have some underrated moves. He has the tornado spin, the jump hook, he had a nice little runner shot, and he did have the Shaq attack move, or he would just elbow you in the face and dunk on you. So I mean, Shaq, his offensive game, it was kind of limited. He would be a liability at the free throw line, but I mean, his overall dominance in scoring, you cannot overlook that. And when looking at his dominance, I always point to the 2000-2002 finals, where he averaged 35.9 points per game and shot 58% from the field and won 3 finals MVPs all in a row. So that stretch alone, I think that vaults Shaq in the top 10. And when you add all the accomplishments, him being 10th all time, leading the NBA in field goal percentage, I think that takes Shaq into the top 10, even though you might not think of him as like a pure scorer. Based on resume and everything I've said, I think Shaquille O'Neal definitely belongs in the top 10. Some may say higher, some may say lower, but I do really value Shaq's dominance as a scorer, even though it might be overlooked. At number 8, I do have James Harden, and since joining the Rockets in 2012, James Harden's been able to average 29.5 points per game. He's averaged 30 points per game over the last 3 seasons, and he's currently averaging 38.5 points per game, which would be the most in the modern era of basketball. So that is something to say James Harden is a dominant regular season scorer. I know he kind of has a reputation of a playoff choker. I actually recently did make a video of how him and Karl Malone kind of underperform in the playoffs. But I mean, if you do look at it, James Harden is still one of the most unique talents you've ever seen offensively. Some would say he manipulates the game, and his style of play is kind of gimmicky, but he is still a great scorer nonetheless, and he kind of has developed an unstoppable move with a step-back jumper where he kind of kicks his legs out. It is frustrating to watch him sometimes, and Charles Barkley even said last night how it's not exciting to watch a guy dribble 5,000 times and take a pull-up jump shot or go in the lane and get fouled. I know it's not the most exciting style of basketball, but it is effective and does get the job done in the regular season. The playoffs, I'm still kind of holding out. But I mean, Harden is definitely one of the greatest scorers, and I think this season averaging 38.5 points per game, that really does show how great of a scorer James Harden is. And I mean, even last year he averaged 36 points per game, which is another ridiculous stat line. That's the second most points scored in the modern era. And as James Harden's career progresses, he's probably going to break all the modern day scoring records with 50, 60, and 40 point games. So I mean, I am kind of projecting Harden, but I think he is worthy of a top 10 spot. Even if his play style is not suiting to you, I think you guys should understand James Harden is still a great scorer, and he does get the job done. At number 7, I do have the logo of Jerry West. And Jerry West, I would say, is a very underrated scorer. His career average of 27 points per game is 5th all time. He's 3rd all time in playoff points per game at 29.1 points per game. In the NBA Finals, where it matters most, he averaged 30.5 points per game. That is good for 5th all time. And I mean, me personally, I would call him the Steph Curry of his day. Even though he did this without a three-point line, he still was able to score 25,000 career points, and he is the all-time leading scorer for the NBA Finals with over 1,600 points. So I mean, the scoring resume for Jerry West is obviously impressive, but I mean, when you factor in he did this while being highly efficient without a three-point line in an era that was dominated by big men, I think that makes it even more impressive. And Jerry West, the outside shot was really not stressed in his era, but he still was a great shooter. And I mean, the last thing I'll add, Jerry West is 8th all-time in career playoff points at 4,457, and he really is known for his terrible finals record, but Jerry West was one of the most clutch players in his day. He did have a couple of things go wrong for him. He got unlucky versus the Boston Celtics a lot of times, but that doesn't really take away from the fact that he was a great scorer. And for a lot of those years in the Lakers, he was splitting touches with other great scorers like Elgin Baylor, Miguel Goodrich, and even Wilt Chamberlain. So I mean, Jerry West is an underrated scorer, and his resume speaks for itself. At number 6, I do have LeBron James. And the thing that stands out for me with LeBron James is his sustained level of play and basically his longevity. For the past 16 seasons, LeBron James has averaged over 25 points per game in each of those seasons. He's a one-time scoring champion, with his highest season being 30 points per game. He scored the most points in NBA playoff history, and currently he is 4th all-time in total points, on the quest for breaking Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's all-time points record. And some would say LeBron James, he's bully ball, and he doesn't really have that much of a skill game. But I think LeBron James, his game is more nuanced than that, and it's really not that simple. We have seen his game kind of evolve from being a straight athletic freak in his early days in Cleveland to being a better shooter in Miami and becoming a super efficient scorer. And that level of play that kind of translated to Cleveland and now LA, LeBron's always been an efficient scorer, but those days in Miami, he was an absolutely ridiculous efficient beast. He was able to average 26.8 points per game on 56.5% shooting and 27.1 points per game on 56.7% shooting. Those are some of the most efficient, high-volume scoring seasons of all time, and you really don't see that often. And LeBron James, for his career, his average of 27.1 points per game, that is good for 4th highest all time. That may come down in his later years, but I mean, right now that's super impressive. And I think LeBron James, some would argue that he's not a top 10 scorer of all time, but looking at the resume and looking at how his game's evolved, I think his game is more than bully ball, as I said, and people who just kind of boil it down to saying he just runs people over, I think that is kind of a general kind of cliche. So I think LeBron James, he is a top 10 scorer of all time and good enough for 6th all time on my list. At number 5, I do have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the all-time leading scorer in NBA history at 38,387 points. And similar to LeBron James, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, his longevity is really unprecedented, and the way he was able to sustain his scoring, playing with other great players, that's really amazing. He's a 2-time scoring champion, and similar to Shaquille O'Neal, he was able to have a 17-year stretch where he averaged 26.4 points per game, shooting 56% from the field. And Kareem, I mean, he has the most unstoppable move in NBA history. You really can't argue with that. I would say it's the best signature move. And when you look at things to define players, the skyhook really does define Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, as he was an unstoppable scorer in his day. He was a great playoff scorer as well, averaging around 24 points per game. And more than not, Kareem always did show up on the biggest stage. He may have not come home with the Finals MVP every time, but he always did show up, and he had some of the greatest Finals in NBA history. And I think just combined with his longevity, his consistency, and just overall dominance as a scorer with a skyhook, I think Kareem really does deserve to be in the top 5, so that is where I place him. At number 4, I do have Wilt Chamberlain, and Wilt Chamberlain has the 2nd highest career points per game average, and everyone knows he's a 48-inch vertical, and he just really is a great athlete all time, regardless of era. And his skill set kind of is diverse for a big man. He did have the Little Dipper finger roll shot, the running hook shot, and he did have a variety of post moves, including kind of the spin, one-handed dunk. And it is hard to evaluate big man, I'll keep saying that over and over again, but I mean, Wilt, he definitely did have some skill for a big man, and his dominance is only comparable to Shaq, but even then, some would argue Wilt is more dominant than Shaq, as Wilt was able to compile 7 seasons over 30 points per game, 2 seasons over 40 points per game, and the one ridiculous season where he averaged 50.4 points per game in 1962. And Wilt as a scorer, his resume is absolutely ridiculous. He has 72 records, and his most impressive record being that he scored 100 points in an NBA game, something that we probably won't ever see broken in the near future. Maybe James Harden can break it if he gets hot and goes to the line a couple of times, and I really don't see someone breaking that. And some of his other unbreakable records, it includes having scored 65 points 15 times, scoring more than 50 points 118 times, and just looking at that number, 118. And he averaged 50 points per game for a season. So imagine you score 40 points in a game, and that's considered an off night for you. Wilt Chamberlain, his average night was scoring 50 points per game. I think that speaks for itself, and you can downplay Wilt's accomplishments because of the era he played in, but he's not responsible for that. He couldn't control that, and he dominated his era from a statistical standpoint like no other player could, and like no other player will. So that is why I have Wilt Chamberlain at number 4. At number 3, I do have Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant is a 7-foot sniper, and we've never really seen someone like him who can score in the variety of ways he can. Basically, Kevin Durant, he's money from anywhere on the court, mid-range, post, three-point line. He can get you a bucket whenever you need it. And I mean, if you're looking for a comparison, maybe Larry Bird or Dirk Nowitzki, but I don't think those players have the arsenal that Kevin Durant does, or the handle that Kevin Durant does, and that really does kind of contribute to Kevin Durant being one of the top 3 greatest scorers of all time. And just kind of looking at his resume, he's a 4-time scoring champion. He's not really an explosive scorer, but he's a super consistent scorer, and it does carry over from the regular season to the playoffs. Kevin Durant has the 6th highest regular season points per game average and the 4th highest playoff points per game average. So he definitely does show up in the playoffs, and he's actually led the playoffs in scoring 5 different times. And speaking of that consistency, he actually did average 50-40-90 splits in the 2013 season, which is super impressive. Only a handful of players have ever done that in NBA history, with the likes of Steph Curry and Larry Bird. And talking about consistency, just look at Kevin Durant's last 2 NBA Finals appearances. In 2017, he averaged 35 points per game on 55% shooting from the field, 47% from 3, and 93% from the line. That's an insane 50-40-90 splits, averaging 35 points per game. And if you think that's insane, he followed that up the next year with another 50-40-90 playoffs, averaging 28.8 points per game, 52.6% from the field, 40.9% from 3, and 96% from the line. So Kevin Durant, he definitely is one of one when talking about pure score. I think he does have a little bit to add to his resume to beat the next 2 guys ahead of him, but I mean, just from a pure scoring perspective, is definitely up there with the greatest of all time. So I mean, if you guys have watched this far, you should probably know who the next 2 guys are going to be. It's Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. The only question is what order they're going to be in. But right now, I'm just going to tell you it goes Kobe, then MJ. I'm not really going to stress on why Kobe is behind MJ. I'm just going to kind of make my point to why Michael Jordan is the greatest scorer of all time, because I really don't want to downgrade Kobe Bryant being a great scorer. I know he already gets downgraded because he's always compared to Jordan. He's looked at as kind of the knockoff Jordan by a lot of people, so I'm not really going to make that case. Today actually is the anniversary of Kobe scoring 62 versus the Mavericks, so I mean, everyone knows Kobe was a great scorer. I just think Michael Jordan, he was a better scorer, and Kobe, I think, would have the edge in three-point shooting and handles. But everything else, I think Jordan does have the edge if he's not even with Kobe. So here's why I think Jordan is the greatest scorer of all time. He has the most scoring titles in NBA history at 10. He has the most consecutive scoring titles with 7. He has the highest points per game average in the playoffs and the regular season. He has the most points ever in a playoff game. He has the most points per game in a playoff series at 41. He has the most points in a half of a finals at 35. He has the most seasons averaging 30 plus points per game at 8. He has the most games scoring 30 points or more at 562. He has the most playoff games with 50 points or more with 8. He has the most playoff series averaging 40 plus points per game with 5. He's the oldest player to lead the NBA in scoring, and he's the oldest player to win a scoring title. So I mean, that resume alone, I think that puts Jordan over the top and makes him the greatest scorer. But I mean, just looking at his overall game in the eye test, he's lethal from the mid-range, he's a good free throw shooter. In the post, he's basically unstoppable with his fadeaway. And for his era, I would say he's a good three-point shooter. But as we know, in the 90s and then late 80s, the three-point shot really wasn't stressed a lot. And I always compare it today when someone says player A isn't a good mid-range shooter. And I always say, well, do they really need to practice the mid-range shot? Today is all 3 points and layups. Back then, it was mid-range and layups in the post and basically going in. You did have the three-point shot sprinkled in. But I mean, comparing the eras, Michael Jordan, he was a good three-point shooter for his era. And when you challenged him to shoot the 3-ball, he most of the time would rise to the occasion, like the 92 finals. So I think Michael Jordan is the greatest scorer of all time. You can look at Kobe Bryant's accomplishments, being a 2-time scoring champion, scoring 35 points per game in the 06 season, and scoring 81 points in an NBA game, which is still ridiculous, and it's the most points scored in a game in the modern era. Obviously, Wilt scored 100, but that was kind of the prehistoric era. So when you look to the greatest games of the modern era, you would look to someone like Kobe's 81-point game, where he had an absolutely ridiculous scoring streak. I would say Kobe Bryant, he's more of a streaky player, and when he gets hot, he's basically unstoppable. I think when he gets hot, he's better than when Michael Jordan gets hot, and that's saying a lot, because Kobe Bryant, he really does lock into that mode, where he just bucket after bucket, he'll get you. And the knock on him is that he's inefficient, and kind of with AI, Kobe did play in one of the toughest eras defensively, so the efficiency, I'm not really looking at that and saying, oh, I'm going to write Kobe off as not one of the greatest scorers of all time, because I think it's just kind of ridiculous to do that. And I think it's unfair to Kobe that he played one of the toughest eras, and you just evaluate him off his field goal percentage, or saying that he was inefficient. Well, that's really not the case. He's like a 45% shooter for his career, and that's a fine percentage. I know players like KD and Jordan, they were up in the 50% range. I mean, a 5% difference, and taking into account eras, I think Kobe Bryant is fine efficiently, and I think he is the second greatest scorer of all time, behind the GOAT, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. So if you did watch all this video, thank you guys for watching. It is really hard to make a top 10 scorers of all time list. You have to leave out a lot of great scorers, but I really did try to take in the totality of their resume along with their skill. And if you're wondering where a certain player is and why they're not on the list, it's not because they're not great scorers. I just thought that some of the players, they didn't meet all the criteria that I laid out. And just to go over that criteria again, I did have statistical greatness, I had sustained level of play, overall skill and ability, playoff performance, and late game accomplishments. So I mean, when you don't see players like George Gervin, Elgin Baylor, Carmelo, T-Mac, Hakeem, Steph Curry, or Larry Bird on this list, it doesn't mean they're not great scorers. Just for me personally, my criteria, I didn't think that those players met all 5 of my requirements. So that is maybe why you didn't see them on the list. And if I did have to make a tier ranking, I'll show you that at the end, because there are some players who kind of would fit in the same tier as an Allen Iverson or a Jerry West, in that range, but it's hard to narrow it down to a top 10. So I mean, there is a lot of variations of this list you could make. And I mean, just because one player's at the 9 spot and one player's at the 6 spot, that doesn't mean the player's exponentially better than the other player at scoring, even though he's 3 spots ahead. The gap between all these players is very minute, and when talking about the top 3, in my opinion, that's the closest group of scorers. And I think everyone who thinks critically about the best scorers in NBA history, I think their top 3 would be MJ, Kobe, or KD, in some sort of variation or order, being followed by the likes of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain. I mean, after that, it really is up to you and what you preference. But I thought I put together a good list that kind of stuck to my values that I listed off, my 5 main criteria or pillars. And I'll just show you at the end in this video my kind of tier ranking or pyramid ranking of the greatest scorers of all time. So you guys can kind of pause the video and just look at that to end the video. Thanks for watching the video. This is my top 10 scorers of all time. And here's my pyramid of the greatest scorers of all time.